I've been fascinated for quite some time about movies that famous actors or directors or celebrities really liked, and I was scrolling around YouTube, like you do, and I found this video with Martin Scorsese talking about one of his most favorite films. And this movie is about World War II. How appropriate it is to watch a movie with this team on the same month that we are celebrating 75 years since the end of the Second World War. By the by, I am Valentin Rossellini, the movie guy, and I will be reviewing Paisan for you today. So Paisan tells the story of the Italian liberation by the Allied forces from the German armies. It is comprised out of 6 different episodes, which have different characters and themes and genres. The first story is about the arrival of the Allied forces. The second story is the interaction between an American officer and an Italian child. The third is a love story. The fourth is the journey that a young American nurse has to take in order to find a person. The fifth story is about the welcome of some soldiers by the Italian church. And the final one is about some soldiers who get captured by enemy forces. So let me get this out of the way first. This is not a war action movie. If you're looking to have a good time watching some people shoot each other, this is not the movie for you. This is a movie set in the war, but it focuses on the relationships between American soldiers and Italian civilians. It is also a story that implements language barrier, which is something that you don't really see in modern movies. Movies nowadays don't have language barriers. They're either all in English or there are two sides that speak different languages, but they seem to understand each other perfectly. So I love the fact that this movie implemented this language barrier. We see soldiers and civilians talking to each other, but neither side really understand anything from the other one. All 6 stories have different writers, and I was expecting to feel the difference in the transitions, but I didn't really feel that. I did notice that there were some pacing issues with this movie. For example, the first episode ends very strongly, and the second movie fails to pick up on that. It was just very lackluster, I felt like. And I think that if this movie had just one dedicated writer for the entirety of the movie, these pacing issues wouldn't have been a problem. One thing that this movie does very well though is create backstories for its characters. Every one of them gets a moment to shine, whether it is through a drunken ramble or through a very well crafted story. It's difficult to get people invested in the characters that are on the screen for just 15 to 20 minutes. Some movies have trouble doing this even with an hour of screen time. But yeah, this movie does that very well. And it does it better with some characters than others. For example, the second episode, it had a very hard job following up the first episode, and it really failed. I wasn't really invested in neither of the characters, and when it finally ended, I felt sad because it was a very sad situation, but I didn't really feel sad because of the characters. Now, I have to say this about the actors before I start talking about their performances. The director chose not to hire professional actors, so most of these guys are basically on their debuts on the set. So it's kind of harsh criticizing them, but I do have to do it because some of these actors were quite poor, and you can see that their deliveries were pretty good, but their facial expressions were just not there. They had a blank face expression for everything that they were saying, and it really was bad. However, there were a couple of performances that really impressed me. Maria Michi playing Francesca in the Thor story was pretty good. Dots Johnson in the second episode was also decent, but the one who stole the show for me was Carmela Saslow. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. Hopefully I am. She was fantastic in the first episode playing Carmela. And it's even more impressive if you take into consideration that this was her first time in front of the camera. The same with Dots Johnson and Maria Michi. Let's discuss my favorite scene of the movie now. It came in the very first episode, the one which I did enjoy the most. It is an 8-minute conversation between an American soldier called Joe and an Italian civilian called Carmela. Now, The language barrier is the most apparent in this part, because Joe is trying to talk to her, but he doesn't know any Italian, and Carmela is trying to respond, but she doesn't know any English. So basically they can't understand each other, and they only have a couple of sentences that they understood from each other in about 8 minutes of screen time. But it was great, and it was very realistic. So if you want to watch a movie that is important in the context of cinema history, or just want to watch one of Marty Scorsese's favorite movies, this movie is for you. But if you want to watch a movie that is more about action, I definitely do not recommend this one, since this is not what the movie is about. However, I do have an alternative for you if you want to watch action movies. Want to watch an action classical movie, go for Battleground. That movie is pretty good. And if you want to watch a war action movie that is more recent, watch Anthropoid. Cillian Murphy absolutely killed it in that one. So my rating for Paisan is 3 stars.